Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to Second Bite Podcast. I'm your host, Todd Taskey, your esteemed guest today, Dan Khabie. Dan, so happy to have you here.
Great to be here, Todd. Thanks for hosting me, my friend.
Geez, Dan, you are running a show called CourtAvenue, which we're going to get into.
Yep.
But I want to wind all the way back. I am actually sitting in the state where you began your training to make your mark, in the great state of Maryland.
Yeah.
I know you were a Maryland Terp.
Go Terps.
Go Terps. After that, you started kind of right into the business world and kind of right into the marketing world with Digitaria. Can you give a little bit of a background on that and kind of how you started and why?
Yeah. I mean, essentially kind of my story is the following. I'm a huge sports nut. My older brother became, he did his residency with the LA Lakers, LA Kings, LA Dodgers. And my car was pointed to New York City, headed to New York, couldn't wait. Everyone in 1 of 5, everyone lived in New York and worked in New York and did their thing in New York. And my brother calls me up. He's like, Dan, how's like front row seats to the Lakers? I'm like, are you kidding me? Going out west? I'm like, are we allowed? I'm from Minnesota. I'm like, are we allowed to go out west? I didn't think we're actually allowed to go anywhere west of the Mississippi. I thought it was like against the law for people from Minnesota. So I looked at my girlfriend at the time, who had been to San Diego one time. I've never even heard of San Diego. And she's like, well, why don't we go to San Diego instead of LA? I said, okay, that sounds good. Let's just go give it a shot. So we go drive across the country with my girlfriend that became my wife. And instead of going to LA, we went to this place called San Diego. And we exited. We went down to the border of Mexico and realized we couldn't get any further. Sorry about that. Turned around and we just exited this place called La Jolla Boulevard, which is La Jolla Boulevard. And we ended up just starting our life. We had like $1,000 in our pocket and no money. My wife and I had no money. She got into hospitality. I got into the telecommunication space. So this one company was selling BBN, which is what we all know now as the early stage of the internet infrastructure. I got into that world and I learned the infrastructure space. And while I was there and selling that, this guy comes to me. He's like, Dan, like, do you know what you're laying this pipe for? I go, no. He's like, we build things like websites. He's like, I'm like, what the hell's a website? He's like, oh, there's this thing we're building online. We create content for it. I'm like, what is that? And I graduated marketing and communications, and I'm like, that sounds really interesting. And I was learning tech and I was learning the whole thing. And he's like, hey, why don't you come jump and work for me? And at the time, Todd, I was really nervous. I'm like, I'm not an engineer. I'm not in computer science. Like I didn't even know what a website was, but he gets me in there and I ended up getting involved with this thing and selling these things called websites. And while I was doing that, about a year or so, my brother-in-law calls me up. He's like, Dan, I'm selling websites too. Why don't you come out to New York and come see what we're doing? And I go fly to New York, and he had founded a company called Razorfish, which is him and a couple of guys founded a company called Razorfish. Jeff Dotches, Craig, and my brother-in-law was like their chief attorney officer, essentially. And I walk in there and I fell in love, Todd. I walk in there and I've never seen it so freaking cool my entire life.
Open space and people having snacks and coffee.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that.
Whatever it is.
And I have forever been chasing that. I have never fallen out of love with it. I mean, that was my first glance into it. And so that was my first inclination, and I found my muse. And I always say great entrepreneurs and great business people have to find their muse. They have to fall in love. And once you fall in love, you then can work backwards around that roadmap. And I'm a romantic, and I fall in love with companies and people and businesses. And I fell in love with Razorfish, and they were a great help.
So what did you do about that? You went to work for Razorfish?
No. I stole as much as I could from them.
And then flew back to California.
Yeah, I literally walked around and like grabbed as much shit as I can. I actually had like they don't know this, but I actually had the original, they had this read the Razorfish book, which is a cultural book. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to grab the cultural book. I didn't even know what that was.
You know, still have that book?
I don't know if I still have it. I might have it somewhere. You know, I like to move forward. I don't like to look too much behind me. But you know, I grabbed all their stuff, and I remember going in there, grabbing everything they had, like grabbing process documents, and I come flying home with like a bag of like all this shit. And I go to my chairman, the guy who was running the company I was working for. I'm like, I just came back from the coolest thing in the world. I'm like, look at this. I'm like, look at like we struck gold. I'm like, we struck gold. And the guy looks at me. He's like, Dan. He goes, they have no idea what they're doing. And as soon as he said that, I realized I was working for the wrong person. Because
you also, let me ask this. You are 22 or so at the time?
Well, I'm like 20. I'm like 23 at the time. Yeah, 20.
You don't know shit.
Don't know shit.
So the guys at Razorfish could have been full of shit, and he could be right. What alarm bells went off where you said, no, it's them, not him?
You know, the one thing that connects humans is it makes us human is our instincts. The things you can't see. To things that you don't know why, you don't know when, you don't know how, but it's a thing that makes people who they are. Their instinct,
and you're certain of it, right?
Their identity, and you're certain of it. I was certain that they were right and he was wrong, unequivocally. And I knew it right there. I saw it, I felt it, I tasted it. I knew it was right. And it was without a doubt in my mind, as soon as he said they had no idea what they're doing, I knew I was with the wrong horse. At a very young age, I knew it was the wrong horse. And I don't know how I knew all these things. I don't know. I don't know, right? I'm just like, right. I don't know. That's a great question.
It might be that University of Maryland education breeds confidence.
Yeah, I don't know. That's funny. I don't know. I guess I always tell people my brother's like 3 years older than me. He's a genius. I mean, the guy is like an unbelievable. He absorbs information like nothing you've ever seen. And he would always read books, and I got so annoyed because he would never play with me because he's reading all the time. So I'd steal one book and he'd get another book. I'd steal one book, he'd get another book. And I ended up realizing, as he's reading books, I'm going to read people. And I became committed to the art of reading people.
Wow.
And that allowed me to hone my instincts on people. And when I walked in that door and I saw those people and I saw their eyes, I saw their body language, their movement, their spirit, their personality, I knew that was right. And where I was wrong. But that was the first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Tom.
I want to drill into what you did next, but first, as a note, is there one thing or book or something that you read or course you took that you feel like helped you more than anything else learn how to read people?
No. I just talked to a lot of people. I had a lot of great business mentors. I've been very fortunate to have people all around me that have been able to share me their insights and share me their point of view on things. And I think that goes a lot of factors. I just have a lot of humility. My parents had nothing growing up, and I just think you have to have a lot of humility. And as a part of that, when you have a lot of humility and you kind of go with hat in hand and ask people questions and get advice, and people will help you. People tend to do more good than they do bad. And if you go there with a sincere question, they'll tend to help you. So it was never a book. I read books like, everything about the technology and the infrastructure. And I learned things from all the, all the things out there. And I just read all the time. But I always just sought people to learn about the world I was entering. Like I was very into understanding, like, I felt this thing called digital tech was going to change the world. I saw that from Razorfish. They gave me a vision into the future. And then I had to kind of go through that process myself to understand, if I would get involved with this industry, what does that mean? And how is it going to disrupt the industry? So I spent a lot of time in talking to people that were running businesses at the time. Have they heard of these things called websites? What do they think about them? Like, how do they buy them? How do they operate them? Where's the future of it going? Right. So I'm a student of industry. I'm a student of people, and I love. When I walk through airports, I think to myself, I can't believe all these people I don't know, which means I can't believe all the knowledge I don't have. That's how I think.
So going back to the scene now, you're on the wrong horse. You pack up your box and you go home that night. What's going on in your head, and what do you tell your girlfriend?
So my girlfriend that then became my wife, I said, hold on tight. We're starting. Time to go.
Like the next day? Did you go in the next day?
Yeah, like the next day.
And you said, I'm out.
Well, what I said was, we're going to begin baking this cake. And this was new for me. I mean, I'm 23 years old. My dad wasn't a business person. I had no business, doctors around me. No one I know actually built a business. So I had no idea what entrepreneurship was. I had no idea how to build a company. I had no clue. I mean, like zero clue. I had no one like talking to me, like no one talked to me about anything. So I just basically just kind of went on blind instinct. And I kind of said to myself, let me put together a team, because I'm better in a team. I know that about myself. I'm a team sports guy. I play team sports. I play my role really well. I generally blend with people really well. So I've always been really good with teams. And so first thing I want to do is put together a team. And I found a team. And a part of that team, we ended up going out to our parents and said, okay, we want to get $100,000. They're all looking at us like, what? And put up your homes to do it. They're like, okay, what? Like,
and how many guys on the original team?
It was like 5 people. And it was going to be 6, but the one guy 6 ended up not coming. And he's the other Beatle. He's the Beatle that missed.
Yes. So there's 20% each?
Yeah, about 20%. It was me, Bill, Daiga, Richard, Travis. Yeah, about 20 some percent each. That's how we got in the game.
Okay. Raised money.
And then my journey in entrepreneurship began, Todd. And I'll tell you, it started within the first hour we got together. We raised about $100,000. Within the first hour, we had to see an industrial psychologist. Like within the first hour, we needed a therapist because you have 5 people coming together who've never run a business before. Right. Pure panic. Everyone left their jobs. Some of them actually had real jobs, and like everyone's freaking out. And I'll never forget it. Like, there's moments, right? There's moments where things come to life, right? And the first moment for me was the name. That was the first moment when it became real. And I remember sitting there, we're all together in this house and we're all chilling out and we're young people. And one of the women I really, really was doing great work is a girl named Daiga. She was an amazing creative director. And I had a chance to I saw her work and I'm like, okay, I think she has the potential, but she didn't speak English. She's from Latvia, but she was just super cool. And I'm like, I just want to hang out with really cool people. And I just knew that she had talent. Like, she was amazing. And she was married to a guy named Richard. They were together. And we're all sitting there. And Daiga's like, she's out there smoking dope or something. Like, I'm not a big, abuser of any substance. But she's like out there like smoking. She comes back in the room. She has a leaf in her hand. And she goes, guys, I got a story. She's like, there's 2 stars. There's Series A and Series B. And Series A went around the star called Series B, which is the Dogen star, and it made that star shine. As it got closer to it, made it shine. And this tribe later on named that star Series A. They named it Digitaria because it made the other stars like, we should name our company Digitaria. She had the leaf in her hand, which I still have today, and the name Digitaria came to life.
That's fantastic.
And as soon as she said that name, I was like, we got it, baby. I'm in.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this, because we could talk about the growth of that for an hour plus. But since our audience is interested in kind of the transaction phase, because you built Digitaria for 17 years.
Yeah, 15 years.
So take me to the first time when you guys thought, we should do a transaction, or did somebody knock on the door, or were you stuck somewhere and needed? How did all that come about?
So first of all, a couple of big milestones. I think it's important as a young business person who's listening, or smaller businesses. We built a business. We went through the .com era, and that was a disaster for me. It was the first time that I've ever been in real trouble. And I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot about the importance of operations, the importance of cash flow, manage a business the right way. And I didn't have any good operators around me. And I came across a company called Console 8 years later that was doing tech work. We were doing more design strategy work, and they were doing tech work. And they had both a really good tech guy, really good operator, and we merged the companies together. That was a big milestone because right away it allowed me to do what I do naturally, which is spend time with clients, big picture, strategy, vision. And he was able to focus on operations and delivery. So right away, that combination put everything in motion. So that was a first step. So the one thing I tell people is, if you're thinking about your business, you're 1 to 3 million EBITDA, how do you get a 1 + 1 equals 20 or 30? It's really important. And you got to make that decision. Are you a lifestyle business or are you a scaled business? I'm the guy who says, hey, Dan, I'm thinking about ordering like a flower stand in the corner of the store. And I'm the guy thinking, okay, how do we take it globally? So it doesn't mean that you should do that because I have a sickness and an illness, but if you're thinking about going big, you got to think big and dream big. In order to do that, you got to put together the right people and the right synergies, right? So I'm very much about looking at that. Like, how do you get 1 + 1 equals like 30 or 40, right? So that's number one. And then at that point, once I did that, I learned the kind of deals and the importance of it and scaling up, and the business really grew from there. Razorfish gave me a lens into Madison Avenue, and being obsessed pretty much a digital agency stalker or an advertising agency stalker, I became obsessed with the market and I knew everyone in the space. And I fell in love with WPP. And the reason why I fell in WPP, because Martin Sorrell created that out of nothing. And he was the first person to actually do it by acquiring a bunch of assets and building a bunch of things. And I said to myself, if we're ever going to sell this business, I want to be part of that show.
Really?
And it had nothing to do with money, had nothing to do with dollars, had everything to do with the fact that I want to be part of WPP. And what happened is I began living in New York during the summers. I'd literally sit outside of I'll sit outside of their doors. And every time someone would walk out, I'd introduce myself. I'd walk by, like, hey there. And I found out who was doing M&A. And we had one of our people presenting at their M&A conference. They got to a point where they thought, Todd, that I lived in New York City. They had no idea I was based out of San Diego because I just hovered around them all the time until they paid attention because they weren't doing deals in the US and they never bought a company in San Diego. Or San Diego is like a third world country for marketing.
Right. I mean, it's not even LA, for God's sake.
It's not even in the fucking map. They have zero interest in it. I mean, it wasn't until we got through due diligence they really realized it's San Diego. And I always thought to myself, in order for us to sell Digitaria, this had to be the best sales job of my life. Because we'd have to go, we didn't have any interest before. No one's really paying attention to us. We had to go out there and really sell this business.
And so, how big are you at that point?
We were like 12 million.
And doing what, 15%, 20%?
Yeah, 18%, 18%.
Yeah. That's just a real business. Yeah,
it's a real business. But like, you know, that final year we got to 14 and we're kind of going, but we weren't doing it the way we could have done it, the scale in which we could have done it. So I would say we finished up like on our sales, like 14.5, almost 15 million. So it was a real business, but we at that time, this is like 2008, 9 is when I was out there, like 2007, 9 is how I did it. So I tell small businesses, if anyone out there is building a company, if you want to sell your business, you have to go sell your business.
Right.
You have to make an effort to get out there, unless you are that diamond. Like my partner Kenny had Rockfish, and he killed it because everyone knew Rockfish. He built a great business in the back of Walmart. But if you're like me, who's a street fighter out in the world of Digitaria in San Diego, working with like, you know, Sony, clients like that, whatever, like you had to go out there really, you know, get known. And so I became obsessed with WPP. And that's how I started the process. And that was the best time of my life. I mean, I had a chance to sit down with Ogilvy, J. Walter Thompson, Y&R. I mean, to me, it was like the best moment of my life.
So quick question, and then I want to get into the beginning of those conversations. You were at that size, you're doing well, you're still young. There's a bunch of things you're not doing well, right? Because that's just a life when you're 15 million. Did that stuff bother you? And did you need to solve for that? Or was your opinion, we're doing great at all these things, nobody can be great at everything? And did that motivate you towards wanting to do a deal?
I just felt it was time to reinvent the restaurant. I felt that we're serving the same lasagna. We need to change it up. I felt the competition was changing. I felt that our partnerships, the people I was doing business with, I felt like we were getting tired, more fighting than we had in the past. And I feel like we had to do something with this company or we'd forever lose it. And so go ahead. Yeah.
No, keep going. And then I'll jump.
So one of the things I thought about is like, okay, we're at that point. How good are we? How do we get off this island of San Diego? And how do we compete on a national stage? How do I build Razorfish? How do I do it? And the only thing I could do at that point was integrate us into a very weak business that I perceived was weak, that we can change and revolutionize.
And you felt WPP was weak?
I felt J. Walter Thompson was weak within WPP.
Okay. So, and I think I know the answer from some of your comments, but this comes up oftentimes with me, where guys will say, I need to grow the business to a large enough size because there's 5 of us. And so I'm only going to get 20% or whatever we sell it for. And unless it's, $50 million, that's not enough for somebody that, and we have the conversation that, geez, maybe it's hard to get a lifetime's worth of wealth when you only get a quarter of it or 20% of it. Any thoughts or reactions to people that would say something like that?
I mean, listen to me. I tell people never chase money, chase journeys. That's what I say. So I look at as an outcome, what's the journey? What's the experience I'm going to go through? I'm not really concerned about the money. The money will find itself. Money will settle up. I wasn't concerned about it. It wasn't an issue for me. It was a non-issue for me.
So it's not a good opening salvo, if you will, to go to an acquirer and saying, you guys aren't doing a good job. We can fix all of your problems, right? How did you start the conversation? How did you engage that?
So I believed on the premise, and my instinct is that J. Walter Thompson, when it was acquired by WPP, Martin Sorrell had bought the business. When he bought the business, no one knew that they owned a big building in Japan because it's been around for so long, but no one realized it stood in a state. He ended up buying J. Walter Thompson, got the building, used that money from that building to acquire Ogilvy. And Ogilvy went on record, David Ogilvy said, "I'll never sell my company to that little shitty Martin Sorrell guy," whatever. He said, make a comment like that. And he was wrong. And $250 million changed his mind. And I believed that somewhere in J. Walter Thompson, there'd be a diamond in the rough. They had a great leader, Bob Jeffrey, who I ended up working with. They were going through a massive shift because advertising dollars were beginning to shift really quickly. And I believe that we put together a team and we had a vision that could change it. And how it started was a walk on a beach. And I'm walking within Miami. I had inside knowledge, home court knowledge about a company called Imagine It that they bought and destroyed many years ago. And the guys that ran, a guy named Dan Mallon, Scott Kaplan ran it. And I knew it was a really great agency. And they destroyed that agency. There's nothing left of it.
What did they do to destroy it?
They bought it. You know, typical stuff. I mean, I can go on and on about what these companies do, but they bought it. Let's just say they bought it. You know, you give a gun. I always tell people, in the case of big advertising agencies, when they acquire digital assets and they don't know what to do with them, you just got to take the gun away from them, or they'll shoot you and shoot everyone else around them. Not because they're not great at what they do. It's just because they're trying to save something that doesn't exist anymore. So when I went into J. Walter Thompson, and this is when I emerged as it's my time. I got my partners or exits. We all worked together to do it, but we all achieved that. Now I had a vision of, I want to build that fucking Razorfish.
And you're how old now? 40?
I'm like 35.
Okay.
I'm like, I want to build 35, 36, something like that. I want to build Razorfish. And I set out on that journey. And in order to do that, you got to take a lot of risk. And the first risk we did is I was on the beach with Bob and I walked with him and I said, "Bob, this is like maybe a month in." I said, "Bob, I have a vision." I go, "I think we could take over J. Walter Thompson's offices and digitize them." He stops me right there on the beach. He goes, "Dan, you just were acquired. You're going to max out your earnout. You guys are doing great. You have no distractions. Don't waste your time." So we keep walking. I said, "Bob, I'm willing to bet everything you paid us that we can turn that around." And this is the young, stupid Dan saying this, right? This is a young kid saying this, not knowing what it meant.
Was that obvious to you?
It was that obvious. It was that obvious.
Okay.
And he says to me, "Why don't you fly to New York and why don't we talk about it? But if you think you can raise my baby better than me, and you just came here, you got a lot to learn." So I walk in there and I meet with Lou and I meet with Bob and I meet with all the people and I put together a story for us to do this deal. I told my partners, those homes you just bought and everything you bought, we're putting it back in the middle. We're pushing it again. And that was a huge risk I took on. I pushed that internally because what they did is they redid the whole buyout as a part of this deal.
So it was
they recapitalized it.
So the whole earnout piece, which for their deals is relatively big, you put into the pot in equity?
Yeah, we had to recapitalize it, right? Because of the back half of it, we had to recapitalize because now the base of the business, because we acquired Minneapolis, is much bigger.
Wow.
Which means that our growth rate, if we'd have grown by 20, if we would grow by like 10, if we would grow by 10 to 50%, we'd have hit it. Now we'd have to grow by 25 to 30%.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't know that, right? I didn't know that. The other thing
Meaning
I didn't realize.
You didn't do the math?
We didn't do the math, but we're stupid young kids, I mean, what do you know? I mean, I don't know. I've been a big ego. I'm a young kid going for it, right? And then the other thing, what I didn't realize is that not only were they're not an agency anymore, they're no longer Imagine. They actually became the client. They had one client in that office, and they became the client. So they weren't even like, let alone being Digitaria, they actually became a healthcare client. They were literally like healthcare people that went in a shitty hotel. So we went from healthcare in a shitty hotel. I had to take them all the way over here because this happened really quickly. Because J. Walter Thompson's thinking, I got a sucker in my hand. That's what they're thinking.
Wow,
we got a sucker.
Of course.
So I end up going back pitching to the team. We all get together, like, let's just do it. Let's make a mark. And little we know that one of our biggest competitors was in there in the process of taking away all the business. Company called Sapient, which was the best in the business.
Yep.
And we did the deal and we were in trouble from day one.
Hey, it's Todd Taskey here from the Second Bite podcast. I hope you're enjoying the episodes. Dan Khabie is a force, isn't he? Anyways, I had to cut this into two pieces. So that you've just seen part one, we'll post part two, which, depending on when you want to watch this, is right in line with Dan. I hope if you have any ideas for future guests that you'll reach out to me on the show notes or connect to me through LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. I hope that you're enjoying these episodes, and anything we can do to improve them, just let me know.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.